everyone, and welcome to Completely Booked, the official podcast of the Jacksonville Public Library. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Gabby. On today's podcast, we chat with Amy Barnett. In 2014, she founded the American Civility Association, Incorporated. It was born out of the Sandy Hook Elementary tragedy of December 14, 2012, when 20 children and 6 adults were killed in a violent gunman attack. Over the last 6 years, Amy and her team of educators, medical experts, neuroscientists, mental health specialists, authors, and concerned business professionals have been on a mission to end school violence and bullying. Amy has authored several programs under the multi-platform interactive B.O.S.S, which stands for Brain Builders Operation Safe Schools, that takes trainers, educators, and their students on a journey into the world of civility and brain building. B.O.S.S is considered kindness literacy that strengthens mental health and is literally changing lives in school cultures. As of the 2019 school year, B.O.S.S has reached over 25,000 students, educators, and school counselors in Florida. The results are mentally healthy and happier kids, safer school campuses, and improved learning gains. So without further ado, here is our interview with Amy Barnett.
Well, welcome, Amy. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm a native Floridian. Not born in Jacksonville, but I was raised here and actually went through the school system here since I was 2 years old and have always remained here. I love Jacksonville.
So tell us a little bit about the American Civility Association.
American Civility Association was actually born out of a tragedy with Sandy Hook Elementary when a shooter came in and 20 children and I think 6 of the educators were actually gunned down. And I thought that just shouldn't ever have happened. And I wondered what could be done about it. And I just couldn't even sleep. And a friend said, well, you know, if it's on your heart, you're probably the one who's supposed to do something. So I thought, what could I do? And as a researcher, I started looking into, was it preventable? And was there anything we could do to help school children not have that happen? And we found out, yes, there was a lot we could share with them and ways that could have been potentially prevented or not inspired again. And so American Civility Association and our programs were born.
That's a great story. I've heard that your programs are getting amazing outcomes. Tell us, what do you measure and what are the outcomes?
Okay. Well, we found that disciplinary referrals include things like bullying and fighting at school, those kind of things you would consider violent behaviors or just mean behaviors are included with things like class disruptions. And so disciplinary referrals are one of the things that are measured across the state. So we could look at disciplinaries the same month, year before, and even year by year, and count them actually and see if it made a difference. And our programs that teach students how to really more care about one another, to face the day through kindness and other brain building tools, that it makes a huge difference in the classroom and around the school campus.
And has the ACA received any recognition for all of the work you've done?
Actually, we have the very first 2 years of the program, we were really just testing the different programs to see if they made any difference. And one of our pilot schools was in St. Johns County, really close to here, St. John's Technical High. And because they went from 400 referrals and being a failing school the year before the program, and then the next year they had just less than half of those, and it's continued to improve. And the reading gains on the testing were noticeable, like 27 and in some cases 47% improved. It caught the eye of the Commissioner of Education, Pam Stewart, and I was invited up to meet with her Safe and Healthy Schools team. And, there's experts on that team who are able to say, well, I know why the reading gains went up, because we weren't expecting that. We were just looking to help the school culture and bullying and violence not be popular. But the reading gains went up, and one of the psychologists said, well, that's because it opens the brain to learning when they do these positive behaviors. So that led me to research and get in touch with neuroscientists who have actually put together a paper on what we're doing that says why our programs are actually, very successful on various levels.
Can you tell me a little bit about these kindness and brain building programs?
Yes. It's really exciting. There's in the newer sciences, functional MRIs. A lot of us may have had an MRI from time to time. Have you ever had one?
No.
But they put you in a chamber. But now there's these very detailed MRIs for the brain. They call them functional MRIs, where they can actually see what's happening in the brain. For instance, when we smile, which is one of the brain tools, they can see these little lights in the brain that are actually the use of oxygen in our brain. And they know that in the frontal lobe of the brain, right above the eyes, is where learning happens and where good decision making happens and where creativity happens. But in the temporal part of the brain, all those lights go off when there's chronic stress or anger or unforgiveness, a lot of what's like rudeness, that uses up a different part of our brain. And the oxygen then doesn't get to go to the part of the brain where we're going to learn. So one thing we learned is when kids are under a great deal of stress, which our society today is super stressed, and our kids are super stressed, that they can't learn. So whatever programs we bring into the school, as long as they're under stress or even being bullied or operating out of anger or meanness, that oxygen is in the temporal lobes is being already used up. So they're not going to be able to learn all those lessons we want them to, and they're not going to be able to be as creative or to learn as well, I should say. But so in these functional MRI studies, they have seen that when we practice gratitude, that chronic stress and gratitude will not coexist. So when we get kids to write down or to say things they're thankful for, it releases the stress. And suddenly they can learn. They can recall what they've studied. They can do better on testing. Plus, the disciplinary referrals go down because they find it feels good to be kind or to be grateful or to smile. These things release those hormones and chemicals in our brain that, are good for us. So, as humankind, we really are designed for kindness and gratitude.
That's interesting. I know that one of your pilot schools here in Duval is West Riverside. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what programs you brought into West Riverside Elementary?
Yes, we have several programs for different age groups, from an intervention program for teens. And then for elementary, we have a program called Precious, Not Prickly. And all of our programs are based on what we call kindness literacy. So it involves books that teach compassion, integrity, not to be dishonest, to care for one another. There's a book called How to Heal a Broken Wing, about a little boy who notices a pigeon on the ground in New York City. And he's the little guy, but he noticed it and helped. He was able to bring it home and help mend it back to health. So our kindness literacy books teach the kids ways that they can make a difference as a little child. And then we actually have what we call a kindness kickoff event and a kindness week, where they have challenges to do the most acts of kindness possible. And the goal is, after a week, kindness then becomes a feel-good lifestyle within the school. It doesn't interrupt the classroom, except for someone coming in and reading the story, which the teachers appreciate, because usually it's someone else and they can take a break and get some work caught up on. So it's a feel-good thing for them too. But the kids embrace the kindness and enjoy earning. They get little hedgehog buttons for having done an act of kindness. And every child, the goal is for every child to get one. And when we were able to do that at West Riverside, their disciplinary referrals dropped by 60% the first year. And they have gone from being a school with lots of space for students to being a school that's now on a lottery type system to get in the school, because so many people want to come there now because of its reputation as such a kind school.
And what about books for older kids? What sort of lessons do those teach?
Older kids, the books that we have focus on resilience and consequences, because as teenagers, their brains, the frontal part of the brain is not developed until we're much older. And that's where decision making happens. And just to say that teenagers, if you think of their brain like a Ferrari with bad brakes, they are learning machines. They want something new every single moment, but they don't know when to put the brakes on. And it's the same with the decisions that they might make. And we think as parents, what? Why would they do that? I've told them their whole life not to drink and drive, or not to drive others, whatever it is that you think, why would they do that? They know better. But teenagers need to be reminded every day, every time they go out of the house, because that part of the brain is not really connected as strongly as when you're an adult. So they need books that teach consequences, because they don't think that far. They don't think that, for instance, one of the books, which is called Whirligig, it's a story about a teenager who got very frustrated. His parents had moved him 3 times, to new neighborhoods, and he wasn't being accepted like he felt he wanted to be. And so he was angry after a party and hopped in a car, and he saw some headlights coming towards him, and he decided, I'm just going to run into it. So he ran into the headlights. Well, the consequences were it killed a young girl, killed an 18-year-old girl. And at first he was just mad because that interrupted his life. And then the book starts teaching the consequences, and him meeting the parents and how that made how they were feeling. And he started seeing the consequences of his actions. And then he gets an assignment by the mother of the daughter to build whirligigs that would help remind the world of her and the joy that this daughter used to bring to people. And it's an amazing story. He has to travel on his own. He's like 17 years old. He has a bus ticket, and he has to take this book of whirligigs and travel around. And it's amazing how he grows, and just the realization of what he's done, and forgiveness. There's just so much, and the people he meets. So books like that, Whirligig, are great. We all would enjoy it, but it's especially good for teens. And then we have a lot of books on resilience. In other words, people who at a young age, like Bethany Hamilton, who a shark bit her arm off as she was surfing, and she had a goal of being a national surfing star, and her resilience of how she overcame that. And for teens, you can imagine, where self-image is so important, and then you don't have an arm. But stories like that really help put where the importance is and the importance of friendships, and that no matter what happens, there's potential of being resilient and overcoming it.
That's great. Is it possible for adults to change their brains too, the way that kids and teenagers can?
Absolutely. It's called neuroplasticity. I've learned a lot of big words. It's been great for my vocabulary. But neuroplasticity is the ability to not just expand our brain, but they've learned recent studies in the last 3 years, they can see that chronic stress destroys gray matter. But these tools that we use that are the basic ones are gratitude, and kindness really covers anything from acts of kindness to just using kind words. But that these things help build new connections in our brain. So yes, we are able to rebuild those parts of our brain. And another thing that we have learned recent history, and I meet with a different neuroscience, another big word. I meet with different neuroscientists when I have the opportunity. And I recently learned there's this place at the base of our skull called the RAS, which stands for Reticular Activation System. And they've known that's there for a long time. But what they've in recent history learned is that this is the filter that, and they've known that. But what they didn't know is that we feed the filter that tells our brain what to put at the top of our interest. So sensory, we are getting many, many signals, like thousands of signals. But as a brain, we can only process a small portion of that per second. So this filter tells our brain what's important to each individual person based on what we've been feeding our brain. So if we're feeding our brain violence and meanness and negativity and things like that, it's going to say, okay, there that is right over there. Let me bring that to her attention. But if we're feeding it positive things, and a lot of that has to do with literacy and what we're reading or what we're watching, what we're listening to, and the people that we're surrounding ourselves with, negative people can help tell our brain, oh, what's important is what's negative. So in our society, it's important for us to fight the negativity intentionally. And so one of the ways we can do that is recommend books. I call it kindness literacy. There's not really a department or section for kindness literacy, but I think it would be helpful if maybe one day we had that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I wanted to touch back on something we were talking about a couple minutes ago about disciplinary referrals. Why do you measure those, and does that measure bullying incidents?
Well, bullying incidents are included in that. It's not reported easily statewide, but you can see if there have been violent different levels of discipline on campuses. But it's interesting because what we've found we've got over 20 schools in the state of Florida right now. We follow pilot schools, which we have 4 of those. And in each of the pilots where we can actually go back and measure when, say, the 400 disciplinary referrals at St. John's Technical was a few hundred the second year. By year 3, they only had 48. And by year 4, they only had 12. And they just don't have bullying and meanness any longer because it's not popular. What's popular is seeing your name listed for having done something kind, or having the ability to recognize a teacher for doing something good for you or another student. They use sticky notes that you'll see them stuck all over the doors in the hallways of good things, and everyone likes to see their name up there. And it just isn't cool to be unkind.
Love that.
And what are your plans for the future?
We were just having a meeting this morning about that because there's so much need, and we want to reach as many kids as possible. We don't want to see any more violence in schools. And during this time where so much money is being spent to surround schools with armed guards, which is a good safety feature that people are feeling safer, but there's so much they can do from the inside out. So our goal is to reach as many schools as possible. We're adding one this year, but we're able for as many supporters as we get to add up to another 5 schools this year. We have volunteers and staff that can do that. So our goal would be to add 5 schools this year in Duval County.
Yeah. Is American Civility Association just a local organization?
We are mostly statewide as far as our impact goes, but we're located here in Jacksonville, and really all of the funding has come from generous people in our area. Mm-hmm. We did get a grant for Polk County, which allowed us to do a lot of schools, but for American Civility and our part in that, it is local in that way.
And what books would you recommend for our listeners interested in learning more about what you do?
For parents or adults in particular, a lot of our information is based on a study that came out. It was called the Civility Project at Johns Hopkins. And one of the co-founders was Dr. P.M. Forney, Forni. And one of his books is called Choosing Civility. It's a real easy read, and it lists many ways to be civil, and it includes kindness. So I love that book. And then for teenagers, Dr. Ben Carson wrote a book called You Have a Brain, a teen's guide to think big. And it gives them, it's not that because I tell you to do it kind of book. It's a book that says, here's the brain. Here's your brain. Here's what happens when you're not kind. Here's what happens when you're kind. And if you want to not have those consequences, this is a great book to read. And consequences can be good as well. So we want them to be seeking good consequences. Think about their goals and dreams and what they need to do to get there as far as their choices go. We try to get kids to power through their day with what we call positive brain fuel rather than negative brain fuel. Another good book is, this is great for parents and any expert, educators, school counselors, but it's called The Teenage Brain. It's by Dr. Frances Jensen, and it's a survival guide to raising adolescents and young adults based on her experience with her teenage boys. It's great. She tells great personal stories that having raised teenagers, I think we all would relate to it.
Yes, definitely. What can our listeners do today to start practicing kindness?
We have a card that has a heart on the front of it that shows, it's called The Heart That Keeps Giving. So they could actually draw a heart to put up on the refrigerator, call it The Heart That Keeps Giving, and just write on that heart maybe 10 things that would be acts of kindness. It could be buy a cup of coffee for someone, leave some muffins on a neighbor's porch anonymously, bring flowers to a nursing home, call a friend you haven't talked to in a long time, do the dishes for mom.
Yes.
Wash dad's car,
Mm-hmm.
But just as a family, you could come up with a chart, and it's just a reminder that you never stop, you just do one and another, and those are good ideas. And for a family, I recommend that in the morning, someone starts the gratitude chain and just says, here's what I'm thankful for already this morning, just to start the day. And then challenge each day that evening or the next time as a family you can get together that you'll share an act of kindness that you did. So you're accountable to one another, but it becomes a theme within the house I have a friend who painted behind her kitchen door on a wall in chalkboard paint, and they write their gratitudes and the act of kindness up there because they're on so many different schedules.
That's so great.
Who inspired you to be so kind-hearted? I mean, you really are just like the sweetest soul. What was your upbringing like?
Gosh, that is such a good question. I had amazing parents. Both my parents were amazing people. They were both very active here in Jacksonville in community, and supporters of organizations, and always taught us that, the world is not about you. It's about what you're, who you are in the world and what you're doing to make it a better place. My mom was a third-generation orphan, and for generations, the moms in her family had not figured out how to parent, and they gave their children up. My mom had no siblings. She was raised in, group home orphanage, and she decided that she was going to do everything possible to keep her family together. And just the way, growing up, knowing that even though families go through ups and downs, it's really about the caring for one another, the sticking together. Sometimes it was the kids against the parents. My parents were always united. But I think just that sense of family, but then that we are more than just our own. We belong to a community, and to try to bring that same sense of supporting each other, caring for one another into the community. So I guess I've just never felt like I'm responsible just to me and what my little world is about, but it's about, the world we have around us. And I think everyone was struck by Sandy Hook Elementary, or like the Twin Towers when they came down. You just don't think in America, these things are going to happen. But it's empowering to know that we don't just have to accept it, that there's something that we can do to change it. We just might have to dig a bit and find out what that is.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. Your story is super inspiring. And if people want to get involved with the ACA, how can they, get involved on their end?
They can email me at amyb@americancivility.org.
Thank you, Amy. Is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know?
No, just thank you so much for having me and giving me an opportunity to make people aware that there is a solution, that there's hope, that we don't have to just accept that schools are going to keep becoming more violent, that it's a simple turnaround and they can start it at home. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. If you'd like to find out more about the American Civility Association, or if you would like to get involved, head to americancivility.org. We'll also post the books Amy mentioned in her podcast on our website if you'd like to check them out from the library's catalog. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please rate and review Completely Booked on whatever platform you stream your podcast from. Until next time, I'm Gabby.
And I'm Amanda. Bye for now, guys.